This video is looking at Hawk Roosting, the poem by Ted Hughes, and I'd recommend that you've got a clean copy of the poem so you can annotate along with me, make your own notes, and add any notes that you think of on the way through. So first of all, I'd always look at the title before you start reading the poem to see what the expectations of the title are. And then again, after you've read the poem and worked out the kind of story and progression, to see if your expectations or your anticipation of what the poem was about was right, wrong, has been changed or altered in any way. So hawk roosting, a hawk is a bird of prey. So we have these ideas of a predator, of something that's strong and natural and powerful. And the verb to roost means to rest or to sleep. So it's when a bird kind of goes up high and is kind of at least at rest, but also thinking it's safe. So roosting is a kind of slightly more vulnerable state, maybe. And one of the things about the idea of hawk roosting is to look at how far you think that this bird is or isn't actually resting whilst it's at the top of the trees. Now, if you read the poem through for yourself, there may be some vocabulary that you're not altogether familiar with that we can look at on the way through, but generally trying to establish the ideas behind it. So the poem's written in quatrains, and quatrains are 4-line stanzas. And we can see that in the first stanza, we're told that the hawk is sitting at the top of the trees. And even when it's sleeping, it's thinking about how it's going to perfectly kill. And then we have a section where it's kind of considering its environment and its relationship to its environment and its mastery and control of its environment. And that then moves into a consideration of its power and its own capacity for violence, with the kind of underlying idea of why it has this capacity for violence. And the poem builds to this final kind of couplet, the final 2 lines, where the hawk declares that, you know, things have been the same in that kind of second line of the quatrain, but the final 2 lines say that it believes that it is in control and it can keep things the same, that it hasn't allowed any change and it will keep things like this. So story-wise, we can make the note that this is a dramatic monologue, that we're hearing in the speaker in the first person is the kind of monologue of the hawk. And it's kind of giving this not quite stream of consciousness, because it makes more sense than that, but it's kind of giving this account of how it operates and its relationship to the world around it. So what I'm going to do now is just to zoom in on this a little bit and to show you how I'd annotate it as we go through. Now, when you're annotating a poem, this is often the first step in terms of being able to deal with this for an exam. And I wouldn't say that actually the kind of annotation is the finished product. You've got to then make sure that you're consolidating those ideas so it's in some sort of order and structured argument. So you have a theory of hawk roosting. If you're comparing it to another poem, then you have to kind of be aware of the strongest points that you're going to look to compare, maybe do some matching up with another poem. If you're writing about it in isolation, then you should be able to come up with a thesis statement, with a theory that Hughes presents the hawk not only as this, but also as this, using these techniques to present it as, you know, or to, you know, explores the way that. So something that you're going to put in your introduction, but that's for after you've looked at everything and you're coming back to it. So first of all, I would make sure that you've got your notes in terms of your connotation of the title, that we've got the predator, and actually that idea of flight then goes into the kind of rest, the idea that it's static. And is it vulnerable or not? You might have very kind of clear ideas about the actual vulnerability of this bird versus its perceived vulnerability by the end of the poem. Is this actually kind of true rest? So looking at this quatrain, I would make sure we're kind of looking at it in sense units. So I'm going to pick up first of all on that full stop. Our quatrain there is end stopped on the fourth line. And to say, okay, we start off with the first person. I sit, I'm going to put the first person, is going to kind of give you this clue to the egocentricity of this bird. If you are egocentric, you are putting yourself at the heart of everything. And that's what the hawk does. Now, understandably, kind of things in the natural world, survival is everything. So, you know, if you've got an animal or a bird or sort of any living thing, and indeed, you know, humanity, survival is the priority. So its egocentricity is perhaps understandable. I'm going to kind of seek to link that with how frequently we have pronouns that relate to possession and to that kind of first person identity. So just as you go through, kind of pick those up, any me's, any my's, any I's, because there is that kind of preoccupation with self. The question for you is this a benign preoccupation with self, or is this a more malevolent preoccupation with self? So I sit kind of instantly kind of shows that we have that static, arguably sort of passive, and yet there is a metaphorical hierarchy going on, because not only is this bird at the top of the trees, but it's also at the top of the food chain. So everything that's in the wood, all of the creation that it refers to later, that is all round and about for this bird. So my eyes closed in action, my eyes closed in action, and my eyes closed in action. There's a really pleasing ambiguity there, that even when this bird is still, or even when there is inaction, there is actually kind of a perception that it is in action. So we've got this caesura here creating that pause. We've got the claim that my eyes are closed and the confidence of the end stop there. You know, this is a top predator who, you know, if you were, I suppose, if you were at risk, you wouldn't take that moment to kind of rest. Eyes closed is a vulnerable position, but the end stop there shows it's you know, control and confidence. Inaction and inaction. Again, the caesura there. There's not a lot of caesura used in this poem, but here it's again that kind of beat to just reflect the fact that it's not moving. And then no falsifying dream between my hooked head and hooked feet. Now, it's interesting that the hawk refers to dreams as falsifying in terms of not real. Later, he refers to sophistry, that idea of fake logic, of kind of clever arguments that obscure the truth. So for this hawk, reality is everything. If he's awake, you know, that is the brutality of life. He doesn't want to retreat into dreams. They are not to be trusted. And even when he's still, there is no doubt about his truth between his hooked head and hooked feet. I'm going to pick up on the consonants of that K there, because it has a kind of harsh, rough sound that's actually kind of mimicking that sharp spikiness of the kind of idea that from his head to his feet, he is metaphorically a weapon. And again, we've got the use of that pronoun my, just to say, you know, complete ownership and control. So there's no dream between his head and his feet. And the other option is he in sleep, even in sleep, he rehearses perfect pills and he will eat. Okay. The only true rhyme in this poem is feet and eat there on that couplet. So again, we've got that kind of confidence there, linking his feet, I suppose, and the idea of his body as a weapon, picked up in hooked head and hooked feet, feet and eat. There's the diacope, that repetition of hooked, again, kind of making it clear that he is unified in his being. Yeah, there is kind of one design running through him. See the ideas of creation again later for that. So as far as this hawk is concerned, he is this thing which is completely dedicated to the truth and reality of his existence, and his existence is catching and killing. Even when he is apparently asleep, he's catching and killing. In terms of the tense, you can also pick up that the tense is the present tense. So even though he's apparently static, you've got this idea of timelessness and the idea that this is ongoing. He believes he's been there since the beginning. He believes that he will be there until the end. To what extent, we ask, is this hawk actually an unreliable or a reliable narrator? You know, to what extent do we believe this bird? Brings in the kind of other point about the idea of the hawk, that, you know, can we believe this bird because where is this bird's voice coming from? The poem itself is paradoxical because it's claiming that this bird operates outside human experience, and the implicit message is maybe that this bird cannot be judged by human morality. The idea that what we would term as brutality and capacity for violence is just entirely natural to this bird. It is not immoral, it is amoral. It's operating outside the human system. Its lack of sentimentality, which is the kind of, you know, warm, smooshy feelings, you can't blame it for that because it hasn't been created with that innate capacity. Innate is inborn. If the hawk didn't survive like this or didn't think like this, then it wouldn't exist because it wouldn't continue. It couldn't eat. It's ironic, obviously, that Hughes has to use human language. So he has to use this falsifying dream, the sophistry of the conceit, the idea that he's made up to describe the hawk. He has to put it within the human framework to be able to convey the ideas to people reading the poem. So we move then to line 5, and we've got this apostrophe, this exclamation. I'm aware there's an exclamation mark. I'm using apostrophe in the sense of it's an address to something that's there. He seems to be kind of almost addressing the trees. And looking at the loaded nature of that word convenience, he views the environment of entirely laid out for use by him, and the kind of satisfaction he feels with that, conveyed by that end stopped line with the exclamation mark. He goes on to elaborate with that with the slightly sort of sibilant line, the air's buoyancy and the sun's ray of advantage to me. And that enjambment there picks up the pace because very quickly he moves it round to being again for his convenience. And it all comes back to the hawk. You can see that again, we've got that me there after the my's and the I's of the previous stanza. And we add onto this with that conjunction at the start of this line, the earth's face upward for my inspection. So we've got this bird who literally is in the top of the tree looking down on the earth, but who metaphorically is kind of saying that actually his position means that the whole earth underneath him has been turned that way to look up at him, to wait, you know, again, another my. And the idea that he is an inspection creates a sense of control. But again, this sense of convenience and what is going on there. There's the slight personification of the earth there, face meaning face as well as face meaning surface. But again, the idea that the hawk is taking on the role of some sort of deity, some sort of god, that the earth is below him looking up, almost in sort of supplication, waiting to be granted approval by the hawk. Looking then at the next stanza, again, my feet locked upon the rough bark, and I'd pick up, and again, you know, we've got that kind of echo of the hooked, that consonant harsh K sound, and the confidence of this end stop, that, you know, again, he's holding and it kind of throws forward to this idea, or anticipates this idea, that my feet are locked on the rough bark. He's holding creation in his foot. So not that this is a hawk that's standing on something, but the hawk is holding everything. Then we move into this capitalized idea of creation, this kind of Christian concept. It took the whole of creation to produce my foot. So the hawk is presenting himself as the epitome, the height of anything that has been achieved on earth, and arguably within the Christian Western tradition, anything that has been created by God. So we've got this particular or possible biblical allusion to Genesis in terms of looking at, you know, God's creation of the world and saying that everything basically has come together to make him, to make, you know, his feet, his every feather, you know, my again, I again, my again. You can see how they're kind of building up. But really, by saying he is the epitome of creation and now he holds creation, he is implicitly putting himself in a kind of godlike position, because if he is God's best work and now he is holding everything that God has made, he is in the position of the deity. We have the kind of, I suppose, kind of lightness and precision of the fricative alliteration with the F's there. And he's almost kind of objectifying each part of him. He's almost kind of using this listing to kind of say that he is the kind of pinnacle, the height of these achievements. You know, we've already heard about his head and feet. Now we're hearing about foot and feather. So he really does view himself as this kind of collection of weaponry, if you like, that are all perfectly synchronized and unified. We have enjambment here to the next stanza, which kind of could show his freedom and the options open to him, because he can hold the world or he can fly and revolve it all slowly. And again, this idea of this egocentricity, this sense that he's the center of the world, he's claiming that when he flies, he's not moving across the world is sort of moving around him. He remains still, the world revolves. So that kind of idea of control on a kind of near global scale, and revolve it all slowly. The kind of L's in there, that alliteration, that consonants, gives that sense of, I suppose, reflection, and it's something looking round and kind of considering things. You know, it's almost kind of like Bond villain, like, if you know, he's kind of almost speculating. I'll fly up and revolve it all slowly. The kind of liquidity of the L sound almost. That leads in from that end stop, that dash, into this kind of assertion. And we have this kind of largely monosyllabic line, which gives you the kind of simplicity of his claim, also the kind of audacity of it, you know, the kind of sense of entitlement. I kill where I please because it is all mine. There is no doubt that he is killing, no doubt he's killing where he wants, and no doubt about his entire and unquestioned ownership. But, you know, far be it from a sort of madness or megalomania being that kind of desire to rule the world. This is a kind of natural instinct for a top predator. And we come back to the sense of, you know, if a human was saying this would be kind of arrogant, this would be entitled. But this is a bird who is at the top of the food chain, who is at the, you know, the top of the hierarchy. He's amoral. You know, there's no judgment from him in it. He has to be able to kind of kill anything and everything that he can see. And again, that end stop asserting his confidence. I mentioned before this idea of sophistry, philosophical kind of false logic. You've got the juxtaposition there of kind of human and natural concepts. Humans try and get their own way through words and through deception and kind of smoke and mirrors, whereas this hawk is saying, I don't go in for any of that language game nonsense. My manners, my kind of artifice, if you like, is not artifice at all. There's nothing artificial or sophisticated. The original meaning of sophisticated was kind of worked on, adapted in a way that wasn't natural. So there's nothing about me that isn't natural. I just tear off heads, because again, it's that pure force. His vocabulary lacks any kind of mercy or empathy. But again, it's that amorality that comes from the fact that he is operating outside the human sphere. He's incapable of anything else. And again, manners and sophistry are kind of put in connection with each other. It's almost a kind of mocking the human world to say, you want manners, mine are tearing off people's heads. And again, we get that kind of end stop there, leading us into this blunt assertion of the next stanza, the allotment of death. Now, to allot something is to distribute it, to give it out. An allotment, it's not necessarily the kind of allotment to grow vegetables on, although there is that kind of sense of place about it, arguably. But it's not an allotment of death in terms of everybody's tomatoes are dying. It's an allotment in terms of he is the one who doles out. He is the one who gives out death. He is the kind of bringer of death and decides absolutely where that death will take place. And again, that puts him in the position of, it's selected by God, right? That is normally the role of the deity, to kind of decide whose time has come. He then goes into, again, more assertion. And the enjambment here is really kind of showing that energy and that bursting through. The one path of my flight is direct, and the sense of anticipation from that hanging on that line break, it's direct through the bones of the living. So incredibly central, the idea that the living are ultimately bones as far as this predator is concerned. It's only a matter of time before it makes you into bones. And you don't have any niceties. You don't have any kind of doubt about it. You go straight through. And again, this idea of choice, there is no choice for this hawk. And, that it's not a conscious kind of decision. He has one path, and that has to be direct through the flight of the living. Through the bones of the living, direct flight. No arguments assert my right. So back to this idea of the kind of lack of sophistry. I've not got anybody who needs to stand up for me. I've got no need to kind of negotiate with anybody. That's almost a kind of impossible concept. And the idea that, no arguments assert my right is I don't need to argue. That doesn't matter because the sun is behind me. And again, you've almost got that kind of allusion to a deity figure. You can think of all the pictures that there is of kind of religious figures with light behind them, with the sun behind them. And also it kind of aligns him with this sort of imagery on a cosmic scale. It's not just the world that he owns, it's the heavens as well, the kind of universe. And we then come into this very strongly end-stopped final quatrain. Again, those end stops talking about the confidence that's there and the kind of polyleptaton of change and change. Polyleptaton is where you use the different forms of a word. So we've got changed, changer, noun, verb, noun. The fluidity of change, but the certainty of him stopping it. The idea that nothing has changed, the repetition, is that conviction. But also we start to kind of realize that this is definitely an unreliable narrator because he is limited to his own perception of the world. He doesn't have a concept of the world outside his own existence or its own existence. And so, of course, everything's been the same since he began because he has no ability to think further than that. He is limited by his lack of imagination, which is ironically something that humanity has. And he is also kind of egocentric or confident, or again, limited enough or trapped within his own belief enough to believe that his control is the thing that it's keeping it there. And so he does, in terms of his own sophistry, ironically, he runs this argument, which is false logic. Nothing's changed since I can remember. Therefore, I haven't allowed it. Hasn't changed because I haven't allowed it. Therefore, I'm going to keep everything like that. That certainty is undermined by the sophistry of the false logic of his argument. He's getting it wrong. So, ultimately, the hawk is a kind of unreliable narrator, as much as he may sound like he is, using, in some places, this Latinate vocabulary, this kind of fancy word or fancy word choice, sophistry, etc., to say how intellectually superior he is. It comes down to the fact that, an awful lot of this is brutally monosyllabic. He is a killing machine. He operates within that frame of reference, and that's it. In terms of the meaning of it, obviously the hawk is personified throughout. It's used trying to take on this view that cannot possibly be human, but is always operating through human language. There's also been a kind of school of thought that has used this poem to talk about, whether or not this is a comment on political power, on tyrants and dictators, on the arrogance and entitlement and brutality of political dictators or rulers, so ironically putting it down back into the human sphere. Now, Hughes did not subscribe to that interpretation when that was put to him during his lifetime. And the question for you is whether or not, because the poets said, no, it doesn't mean that, whether or not you can still say, well, actually, it could be interpreted like that. And I think with poetry, if something's out there, then that is an open interpretation. Hughes' ideas about the poem become another interpretation on it. So, we've got a poem where it could be about kind of conscience or brutality and lack of mercy, or it could be about nature as against humanity. We certainly have, a hawk who is, I suppose, kind of a massively confident, egocentric being that views itself as the kind of zenith, the height of creation. Zenith is a word meaning the top of a wave. Nadir is a word meaning the bottom of a wave. So if you go zenith, nadir, and you can use both of those metaphorically for height and low point. You've got to decide what you think makes this poem effective. And to be honest, I would run both the kind of natural and the political, the human kind of abuse of power arguments, regardless of what Hughes said, because that kind of dual interpretation, or the capacity for dual interpretation, is often what can help you access kind of higher marks on the mark schemes. Hopefully that makes sense. If there's anything else that you think of, or if there's anything you've got in notes or so, please do feel free to leave a comment for me in the comments at the bottom of the video. And I hope this has helped. Thanks. Bye now.